The Essene code of life, as followed by the Brotherhood at the Dead Sea, and Lake Mareotis from the original Aramaic and French translation, compared, translated, and edited by Edmond Bordeaux Szekely. A complete translation from the Aramaic of the manuscript discovered by Count Volney during his travels in Egypt and Syria, 1783 to 1785, giving a record of the discourse between the famous Roman historian Josephus Flavius as pupil and Banus, the Essene, as master, during Josephus' 3-year sojourn with Banus in the desert of the Dead Sea for his initiation into the Essene teaching and tradition. Nature. We are surrounded by her, embraced by her, impossible to release ourselves from her, and impossible to enter more deeply into her. She creates ever new forms. What exists has never existed before. What has existed returns not again. Everything is new and yet always old. We live in her midst, and yet we are strangers to her. She speaks constantly with us, but betrays not her secret to us. We are continually at work upon her, yet have no power over her. She is forever building, forever demolishing, and her workshop is not to be found. She is the sole artist. Goethe. Today nature is inanimate and Pan is dead. Men's souls are scattered beyond the hope of unity, and the sword of formal creeds sharply separates them everywhere. We regard ourselves proudly as separate from nature. To live with the universe made life the performance of a majestic ceremony. To live against it was to creep aside into a cul-de-sac. Yet even now I seem aware of changes stealing over the face of the world once more. Like another vast dream beginning, I feel that man's consciousness is slowly spreading outwards once again. Some voice from the long ago is divinely trumpeting across our little globe. Algernon Blackwood. Chapter 1. The Natural and Cosmic Law. Josephus. What is the law of nature? Banus. It is the constant and regular order of events, by which the Creator governs a universe, an order which his wisdom presents to the senses and reason of men, as an equal and common rule for their actions, to guide them, without distinction of race or religion, towards perfection and happiness. Josephus. Give a clear definition of the word law. Banus. An order or prohibition to act, with the express clause of a penalty attached to the infraction, or of a recompense attached to the observance of that order. Josephus. Do such orders exist in nature? Banus. Yes. Josephus. What do the words nature and cosmos signify? Banus. The word nature bears 3 different significations. 1. It signifies the universe, the cosmos, the material world. In the first sense, we say the beauties of nature, the riches of nature, that is to say, the objects in the heavens and on the earth exposed to our sight. 2. It signifies the power that animates, that moves the universe. Consider it as a distinct being, such as the soul is to the body. In this second sense we say, the intention of nature, the secrets of the universe. 3. It signifies the partial operation of that power on each being, or on each category of beings. And in this third sense we say, the nature of man is an enigma. Every being acts according to its nature. Wherefore, as the actions of each being, or of each species of beings, are subject to constant and general rules, which cannot be infringed without interrupting and troubling the general or particular order, those rules of action and of motion are called natural laws or cosmic laws. Josephus. Give me an example of those laws. Banus. It is a law of nature that the sun illuminates successfully the surface of the terrestrial globe, that its presence causes both light and heat, that heat acting upon water produces vapors, that those vapors, rising in clouds into the regions of the air, dissolve into rain or snow and renew incessantly the waters of fountains and rivers. It is a law of nature that water flows downward, that it endeavors to find its level, that it is heavier than air, that all bodies tend towards the earth, that flames ascend towards the heaven, that it disorganizes vegetables and animals, that air is essential to the life, etc. Wherefore, as all these and similar facts are immutable, constant, and regular, so many real orders result from them for man to conform himself to, with the express clause of punishment attending the infraction of them, or of welfare attending their observance. So that if man pretends to see clear in darkness, if he goes in contradiction to the course of the seasons, or the action of the elements, if he pretends to remain under water without being drowned, to touch fire without burning himself, to deprive himself of air without being suffocated, to swallow poison without destroying himself, he receives from each of these infractions of the law of nature a corporeal punishment proportionate to his fault. But if, on the contrary, he observes and practices each of these laws according to the regular and exact relations they have to him, he preserves his existence and renders it as happy as can be. And as the only and common end of all these laws, considered relatively to mankind, is to preserve and render them happy, it has been agreed upon to reduce the idea to one simple expression, and to call them collectively the natural and cosmic laws. Chapter 2. The 10 Essentials of the Natural and Cosmic Laws. Josephus. What are the essentials of the natural and cosmic laws? Banus. There can be assigned 10 principal ones. Josephus. What is the first? Banus. To be inherent to the existence of things, and consequently primitive and anterior to every other law, so that all those which man has received are only imitations of it, and their perfection is ascertained by the resemblance they bear to this primordial model. Joseph. What is the second? Banus. To be derived immediately from the Creator, and presented by him to each man, whereas all other laws are presented to us by men, who may be either deceived or deceivers. Josephus. Which is the third? Banus. To be common to all times and to all countries, that is to say, one and universal. Josephus. Is no other law universal? Banus. No, for no other is agreeable or applicable to all the people of the earth. They are all local and accidental, originating from circumstance of places and of persons, so that if such a man had not existed, or such an event happened, such a law would never have been enacted. Josephus. Which is the fourth essential? Banus. To be uniform and invariable. Josephus. Is no other law uniform and invariable? Banus. No, for what is good and virtue according to one is evil and vice according to another, and what one and the same law approves of at one time it often condemns at another. Josephus. What is the fifth essential? Banus. To be evident and palpable, because it consists entirely of facts incessantly present to the senses and to demonstration. Josephus. Are not other laws evident? Banus. No, for they are founded on past and doubtful facts, on equivocal and suspicious testimonies, and on proofs inaccessible to the senses. Josephus. What is the sixth essential? Banus. To be reasonable, because its precepts and entire doctrine are conformable to reason, and to the human understanding. Josephus. Is no other law reasonable? Banus. No, for all are in contradiction to reason and the understanding of men, and tyrannically impose on him a blind and impractical belief. Josephus. Which is the seventh essential? Banus. To be just, because in that law the penalties are proportionate to the infractions. Josephus. Are not other laws just? Banus. No, for they often exceed bounds, either in rewarding deserts or in punishing delinquencies, and consider or meritorious or criminal, null or indifferent actions. Josephus. Which is the eighth essential? Banus. To be pacific and tolerant, because in the law of nature, all men being brothers and equal in rights, it recommends to them only peace and toleration even for errors. Josephus. Are not other laws pacific? Banus. No, for all preach dissension, discord, and war, and divide mankind by exclusive pretensions of truth and domination. Josephus. Which is the ninth essential? Banus, to be equally beneficent to all men, in teaching them the true meaning of becoming better and happier. Josephus, are not other laws beneficent likewise? Banus, no, for none of them teach the real means of attaining happiness. All are confined to pernicious or futile practices, and this is evident from facts, since after so many laws, so many religions, so many legislators and prophets, men are still as unhappy and ignorant as they were 8,000 years ago. Josephus, what is the 10th essential of the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, that is alone sufficient to render men happier and better, because it comprises all that is good and useful in other laws, either civil or religious. That is to say, it constitutes essentially the moral part of them, so that if other laws were divested of it, they would be reduced to chimerical and imaginary opinions, devoid of any practical utility. Josephus, recapitulate all 10 essentials. Banus, we have said that the law of nature is 1. Primordial, 2. Immediate, 3. Universal, 4. Invariable, 5. Evident, 6. Reasonable, 7. Just, 8. Pacific, 9. Beneficent, and 10. Alone sufficient. And such is the power of all these attributes of perfection and truth, that when in their disputes the theologians can agree upon no article of belief, they recur to the natural and cosmic laws, the neglect of which, say they, forced God to send from time to time prophets to proclaim new laws, as if God enacted laws for particular circumstances as men do, especially when the first subsist in such force, that we may assert it have been at all times and in all countries the rule of conscience for every man of sense or understanding. Josephus, if, as you say, it emanates immediately from the Creator, does it teach his existence? Banus, yes, most positively, for to any man whatever, who observes with reflection the astonishing spectacle of the universe, the more he meditates on the properties and attributes of each being, on the admirable order and harmony of their motions, the more it is demonstrated that there exists a supreme intelligence, a universal and identic mover, designated by the appellation of God. And so true it is that the natural and cosmic laws suffice to elevate him to the knowledge of the Creator, that all which men have pretended to know by supernatural means has constantly turned out ridiculous and absurd, and that they have been obliged to recur to the immutable conception of natural and cosmic reasons. Josephus, then it is not true that the followers of the natural and cosmic laws are atheists. Banus, no, it is not true. On the contrary, they entertain stronger and nobler ideas of the divinity than most other men, for they do not sully him with the foul ingredients of all the weaknesses and passion entailed on chaotic humanity. Josephus, what worship do they pay to him? Banus, a worship wholly of action, the practice and observance of all the rules which the supreme wisdom has imposed on the life of each being, eternal and unalterable rules, by which it maintains the order and harmony of the universe, and which, in their relation to man, constitutes the natural and cosmic laws. Josephus, were the natural and cosmic laws known before this period? Banus, it has been at all times spoken of. Most legislators pretend to adopt to its basis of their laws, but they only quote some of its precepts, and have only vague ideas of its totality. Josephus, why? Banus, because though simple in its basis, it forms in its development and consequence a complicated whole which requires an extensive knowledge of facts, joined to all a sagacity of reasoning. Josephus, does not instinct alone teach the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, no, for by instinct is meant nothing more than that blind sentiment by which we actuated indiscriminately towards everything that flatters the senses. Josephus, why then is it said that the natural and cosmic laws are engraved in the hearts of all men? Banus, it is said for 2 reasons. First, because it has been remarked that there are acts and sentiments common to all men, and this proceeds from their common organization. Secondly, because the first philosophers believed that men were born with ideas already formed, which is now demonstrated to be erroneous. Josephus. Philosophers, then, are fallible? Banus. Yes, sometimes. Joseph. Why so? Banus. First, because they are men. Secondly, because they are ignorant, call all those who reason right or wrong philosophers. Thirdly, because those who reason on many subjects, and who are the first to reason on them, are liable to be deceived. Josephus. If the natural and cosmic laws be not written, must they not become arbitrary and ideal? Banus. No, because they consist entirely in facts, the demonstration of which can be incessantly renewed to the senses, and constitute a science as accurate and precise as geometry and mathematics. And it is because the natural and cosmic laws form an exact science that men, born ignorant and living inattentive and heedless, have had hitherto only a superficial knowledge of them. Chapter 3. The principles of the natural and cosmic laws relating to man. Josephus. Explain the principles of the natural and cosmic laws with relation to man. Banus. They are simple. All of them are comprised in one fundamental and single precept. Josephus. What is that precept? Banus. It is self-preservation. Josephus. Is not happiness also a precept of the law of nature? Banus. Yes, but as happiness is an accidental state, resulting only from the development of man's faculties and his social system, it is not the immediate and direct object of nature. It is in some measure a superstructure annexed to the necessary and fundamental object of preservation. Josephus. How does nature order man to preserve himself? Banus. By two powerful and involuntary sensations, which it is attached as two guides, two guardian angels to all his actions. The one a sensation of pain, by which it admonishes him of and deters him from everything that tends to destroy him. The other a sensation of pleasure, by which it attracts and carries him towards everything that tends to his preservation and the development of his existence. Joseph. Pleasure, then, is not evil, a sin, as fanatics pretend. Banus. No, only inasmuch as it tends to destroy life and health, which by the avowal of these same fanatics we derive from God himself. Josephus. Is pleasure the principal object of our existence, as some philosophers have asserted? Banus. No, not more than pain. Pleasure is an incitement to live as pain is a repulsion from death. Joseph. How do you prove this assertion? Banus. By two palpable facts. One, that pleasure, when taken immoderately, leads to destruction. For instance, a man who abuses the pleasure of eating or drinking attacks his health and injures his life. The other, that pain sometimes leads to self-preservation. For instance, a man who permits a mortified member to be cut off suffers pain in order not to perish totally. Josephus. But does that not even prove that our senses can deceive us respecting the end of our preservation? Banus. They can momentarily. Josephus. How do our sensations deceive us? Banus. In two ways, by ignorance and by passion. Josephus. When do they deceive us by ignorance? Banus. When we act without knowing the action and effect of objects on our senses. For example, when a man touches nettles without knowing their stinging quality, or when he swallows opium without knowing its sulphureous effects. Joseph. When do they deceive us by passion? Banus. When conscious of the pernicious action of objects, we abandon ourselves, nevertheless, to the impetuosity of our desires and appetites. For example, when a man who knows that wine intoxicates does, nevertheless, drink it in excess. Josephus. What is the result? Banus. That the ignorance in which we are born, and the unbridled appetites to which we abandon ourselves, are contrary to our preservation, that therefore the instructions of our minds and the moderation of our passions are two obligations, two laws which spring directly from the first law of preservation. Josephus. Being born ignorant, is not ignorance a natural law? Banus. No more than to remain in a naked and feeble state of infancy. Far from being a natural law, ignorance is an obstacle to the practice of all its laws. It is the real primordial sin. Josephus, why then have there been thinkers who have looked upon it as a virtue and perfection? Banus, because from a strange or perverted disposition, they confounded the abuse of knowledge with knowledge itself, as if because men abuse the power of speech, their tongue should be cut out, as if perfection and virtue consisted in the nullity and not in the proper development of our faculties. Josephus, instruction then is indispensable to man's existence? Banus, yes, so indispensable that without it he is in every instant assailed and wounded by all that surrounds him. For if he does not know the effects of fire, he burns himself. Those of water, he drowns himself. Those of poison, he poisons himself, if in the savage state he does not know the wiles of animals and the art of seizing game, he perishes through hunger. If in the social state he does not know the course of the seasons, he can neither cultivate the ground nor procure nourishment, and so on, of all his actions, respecting all his wants. Josephus, but can man individually acquire this knowledge necessary to his existence and to the development of his faculties? Banus, no, not without the assistance of his fellow men and by living in society. Josephus, but is not society to man a state against nature? Banus, no, it is on the contrary a necessity, a law that nature imposed on him by the very act of his organization. For first, nature has so constituted man that he cannot see his species of another sex without feeling emotions and an attraction, which induce him to live in a family, which is already a state of society. Secondly, by endowing him with sensibility, she organized him so that the sensations of others reflect within him, and excite reciprocal sentiments of pleasure and of grief, which are attractions and indissoluble ties of society. Thirdly and finally, the state of society founded on the wants of man is only a further means of fulfilling the law of preservation, and to pretend that this state is out of nature, because it is more perfect, is the same as to say that a bitter and wild fruit of the forest is no longer the production of nature, when rendered sweet and delicious by cultivation in our gardens. Josephus, why then have some philosophers called the savage state the state of perfection? Banus, because as I have told you, the vulgar have often given the name of philosopher to whimsical geniuses, who from moroseness, from wounded vanity, or from a disgust to the vice of society, have conceived chimerical ideas of the savage state, in contradiction with their own system of a perfect man. Josephus, what is the true meaning of the word philosopher? Banus, the word philosopher signifies a lover of wisdom, and as wisdom consists in the practice of the natural and cosmic laws, the true philosopher is he who knows these laws, and conforms the whole tenor of his conduct to them. Josephus, what is man in the savage state? Banus, a brutal, ignorant animal, a wicked and ferocious beast. Josephus, is he happy in that state? Banus, no, for he only feels momentary sensations, which are habitually of violent wants which he cannot satisfy, since he is ignorant by nature and weak by being isolated from his race. Josephus, is he free? Banus, no, he is the most abject slave that exists, for his life depends on everything that surrounds him. He is not free to eat when hungry, to rest when tired, to warm himself when cold. He is every instant in danger of perishing, wherefore nature offers but fortuitous examples of such beings, and we see that all the efforts of the human species since its origin sorely tend to emerge from that violent state by the pressing necessity of self-preservation. Josephus, but does not this necessity of preservation engender an individual's egotism, that is to say, self-love, and is not egotism contrary to the social state? Banus, no, for if by egotism you mean a propensity to hurt our neighbor, it is no longer self-love, but the hatred of others. Self-love, taken in its true sense, not only is not contrary to society, but is its firmest support, by the necessity we lie under of not injuring others, lest in return they should injure us. thus man's preservation and the unfolding of his faculties, directed towards this end, teach the true natural law in the production of the human being, and it is from this essential principle that are referred, and in its scale are weighed all ideas of good and evil, of vice and virtue, of just and unjust, of truth or error, of lawful or forbidden, of which is founded the morality of individual or of social man. Chapter 4. The natural basis of morality, of good, of evil, of sin, of crime, of vice, and of virtue. Josephus, what is good according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, it is everything that tends to preserve and perfect man. Josephus, what is evil? Banus, that which tends to man's destruction or deterioration. Josephus, what is meant by physical good and evil, and by moral good and evil? Banus, by the word physical is understood whatever acts immediately on the body. Health is a physical good, and sickness a physical evil. By moral is meant what acts by consequent more or less remote. Calumny is a moral evil. A fair reputation is a moral good, because both one and the other occasion towards us, on the part of other men, dispositions and habitudes which are useful or hurtful to our preservation, and which attack or favor our means of existence. Josephus, everything that tends to preserve or to produce is therefore a good? Banus, yes, and it is for that reason that certain legislators have classed among the work agreeable to the divinity the cultivation of a field, the fecundity of a woman, and the wisdom of a teacher. Josephus, what tends to cause death is therefore an evil? Banus, yes, and it is for that reason some legislators have extended the idea of evil and of sin even to the killing of animals. Josephus, the murdering of a man is therefore a crime according to the natural and cosmic laws. Banus, yes, and the greatest that can be committed, for every other evil can be repaired, but murder alone is irreparable. Josephus, what is a sin according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, whatever tends to disturb the order established by nature for the preservation and perfection of man and of society. Josephus, can intention be a merit or a crime? Banus, no, for it is only an idea void of reality, but it is a commencement of sin and evil by the impulse it gives to action. Josephus, what is virtue according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, it is the practice of actions useful to the individual and to society. Josephus, what is meant by the word individual? Banus, it means a man considered separately from every other. Josephus, what is vice according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, it is the practice of action prejudicial to the individual and to society. Josephus, have not virtue and vice an object purely spiritual and abstracted from the senses? Banus, no, it is always to a physical end that the finally relate, and that end is always to destroy or preserve the body. Josephus, have vice and virtue degrees of strength and intensity? Banus, yes, according to the importance of the faculties, which they attack or which they favor, and according to a number of persons in whom those facilities are favored or injured. Josephus, give me some examples. Banus, the action of saving a man's life is more virtuous than that of saving his property. The action of saving the lives of 10 men, than that of saving only the life of one. And an action useful to be the whole human race is more virtuous than an action that is only useful to one single nation. Josephus, how does the natural and cosmic law prescribe the practice of good and virtue, and forbid that of evil and vice? Banus, by the advantages resulting from the practice of good and virtue for the preservation of our body, and by the losses which result to our existence from the practice of evil and vice. Josephus, its precepts are then an action? Banus, yes, they are action itself, considered in its present effect and its future consequence. Josephus, how do you divide the virtues? Banus, we divide them in 3 classes. First, individual virtues, as relative to man alone. Secondly, domestic virtues as relative to a family. And thirdly, social virtues as relative to society. The natural foundation of individual virtues. Josephus, which are the individual virtues according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banus, there are 5 principal ones, to wit: first, science, which comprises prudence and wisdom; secondly, temperance, comprising sobriety and moderation; thirdly, courage or strength of body and mind; fourthly, activity, that is to say, love of labor and employment of time; fifthly and finally, cleanliness or purity of body, as well as in dress or in habitation. Josephus, how does the natural and cosmic law prescribe science? Banus, because the man acquainted with the cause and effects of things attends in a careful and sure manner to his preservation and to the development of his faculties. Science is to him the eye and the light, which enables him to discern clearly and accurately all the objects with which he is conversant, and hence by an enlightened man is meant a learned and well-informed man. With science and instruction a man never wants for resources and means of subsistence, and upon this principle a philosopher, who had been shipwrecked, said to his companion that they were inconsolable for the loss of their wealth. For my part, I carry all my wealth within me. Josephus, which is the vice contrary to science? Banus, it is ignorance. Josephus, how does the natural and cosmic law forbid ignorance? Banus, from the grievous detriments resulting from it of our existence, for the ignorant man, who knows neither cause nor effect, commits every instant error most pernicious to himself and to others. He resembles a blind man groping his way at random, and who at every step jostles or is jostled by everyone he meets. Josephus, what difference is there between an ignorant and a silly man? Banus, the same difference is between him who frankly avows his blindness and the blind man who pretends to sight. Silliness is the reality of ignorance, to which is superadded the vanity of knowledge. Josephus, are ignorance and silliness common? Banus, yes, very common. They are the usual and general distempers of mankind. More than thousands of years ago the wisest of men said, "The number of fools is infinite, and the world has not changed." Josephus, what is the reason of it? Banus, because much labor and time are necessary to acquire instruction, and because men, both ignorant and indolent, fear it more convenient to remain blind and pretend to see clear. Josephus, what difference is there between a learned and a wise man? Banus, the learned knows, and the wise man practices. Josephus, what is prudence? Banus, it is the anticipated perception, the foresight of the effects and consequences of every action, by means of which foresight man avoids the danger which threaten him, while he seizes on and creates opportunities favorable to him. He thereby provides for his present and future safety in a certain and secure manner, whereas the imprudent man, who calculates neither his steps, nor his conduct, nor efforts, nor resistance, falls every instant into difficulty and dangers, which sooner or later impair his faculties and destroy his existence. Chapter 5. The Natural Foundation of Temperance. Josephus, what is temperance according to the natural and cosmic law? Banus, it is a regular use of our faculties, which makes us never exceed in our sensation the end of nature to preserve us. It is the moderation of the passions. Josephus, which is the vice contrary to temperance? Banus, the disorder of the passions, the avidity of all kinds of enjoyments, in a word, cupidity. Josephus, which are the principal branches of temperance? Banus, sobriety and continence. Josephus, how does the law of nature prescribe sobriety? Banus, by its powerful influences over our health. The sober man digests with comfort. He is not overpowered by the weight of ailments. His ideas are clear and easy. He fulfills all his functions properly. He conducts his business with intelligence. His old age is exempt from infirmity. He does not spend his money in remedies, and he enjoys in mirth and gladness the wealth which chance and his own prudence have procured him. Thus, from one virtue alone, generous nature derives innumerable recompense. Josephus, how does it prohibit gluttony? Banus, by the numerous evils that are attached to it. The glutton, oppressed with ailments, digests with anxiety. His head, troubled by the fumes of indigestion, is incapable of conceiving clear and distinct ideas. He abandons himself with violence to the disorderly impulse of the lust and anger, which impairs health. His body becomes bloated, heavy, and unfit for labor. He endures painful and expensive distemper. He seldom lives to be old, and his age is replete with infirmities and sorrows. Josephus, should abstinence and fasting be regarded as virtuous action? Banus, yes, when one has eaten too much. For then fasting and abstinence are simple and efficacious remedies. But when the body is in want of ailment, to refuse it any, and let it suffer from hunger or thirst, is delirium and a real sin against the natural and cosmic law. Josephus, how is drunkenness considered according to the natural and cosmic law? Banus, as a most vile and pernicious vice. The drunkard, deprived of the sense and reason given us by the Creator, profanes the donations of the divinity. He debases himself to the condition of brutes. Unable even to guide his step, he staggers and falls as if he were epileptic. He hurts and even risks killing himself. His debility in this state exposes him to the ridicule and contempt of every person that sees him. He makes in his drunkenness prejudicial and ruinous bargains, and injures his fortune. He makes use of opprobrious language, which creates him enemies and repentance. He fills his house with trouble and sorrow, and ends up by a premature death or by a miserable old age. Josephus, does the law of nature interdict absolutely the use of wine? Banus, no, it only forbids the abuse. But as the transition from the use to the abuse is easy and prompt among the generality of men, perhaps the legislators, who are prescribed the use of wine, have rendered a service to humanity. Josephus, does the law of nature forbid the use of certain kinds of foods on particular days during certain seasons? Banus, no, it absolutely forbids only whatever is injurious to health. Its precepts in this respect vary according to persons, and even constitute a very delicate and important science, for the quality, the quantity, and the combination of ailments have the greatest influence, not only over the momentary affections of the world, but even over its habitual disposition. A man is not the same when fasting as after a meal, even if he were sober. A glass of spirituous liquor or a drink of hydromel gives degrees of vivacity, of mobility, of disposition to anger, sadness, or gaiety. Such a meat, because it lies heavy on the stomach, engenders moroseness and melancholy. Such a fruit, because it facilitates digestion, creates sprightliness and an inclination to oblige and to love. The use of vegetables, because they are light foods, cleanse the body, and gives a disposition to repose, calmness, and ease. The use of meat, because it is full of nourishment, and of a spirituous liquor, because they stimulate the nerves, creates excitement, uneasiness, and audacity. Now from the habitudes of ailment result habits of constitution and of the organs, which form afterwards different kind of temperament, each of which is distinguished by a peculiar characteristic. And it is for that reason that, in hot countries especially, legislators have made laws respecting regime of food. The ancients were taught by long experience that the dietetic science constituted a considerable part of morality among the Egyptians, the ancient Persians, and even among the Greeks. At the Areopagus, important affairs were examined fasting, and it has been remarked that among those people where public affairs were discussed during the heat of meals and the fumes of digestion, deliberations were hasty and violent, and the result of them frequently unreasonable and productive of turbulence and confusion. The natural foundation of continence. Josephus, does the natural and cosmic law prescribe continence? Banus, yes, because a moderate use of the most lively of pleasures is not only useful but indispensable to the support of strength and health, and because a simple calculation proves that, for some minutes of privation, you increase the number of your days both in vigor of body and mind. Josephus, how does it forbid libertism? Banus, by the numerous evils which result from it to the physical and moral existence. He who carries it to an excess enervates and pines away. He can no longer attend to study or labor. He contracts idle and expensive habits which destroy his means of existence. His public consideration and his credit, his intrigues occasion continual embarrassment, cares, quarrels, and lawsuits, without mentioning the grievous, deep-rooted distemper, and the loss of his strength by an inward and slow poison, the stupid dullness of his mind by the exhaustion of the nervous system, and in fine, a premature and infirm old age. Josephus, does the law of nature look on that absolute chastity to recommend in religious institutions as a virtue? Banus, No, for that chastity is of no use either to the society that witnesses or to the individual who practices it. It is even prejudicial to both. First, it injures society by depriving it of population, which is one of its principal sources of wealth and power. And as bachelors confine all their views and affections to the term of their lives, they have in general an egotism unfavorable to the interest of society. In the second place, it injures the individuals who practice it, because it deprives them of a number of affections and relations which are the springs of most domestic and social virtues. And besides, it often happens, from circumstance of age, regime, or temperament, that absolute continence injures the constitution and causes severe disease, because it is contrary to the physical laws of which nature has founded the system of the reproduction of beings, and they who recommend so strongly chastity, even supposing them to be sincere, are in contradiction with their own doctrine, which consecrates the law of nature by the well-known commandment, increase and multiply. Josephus, why, according to the Mosaic law, is chastity considered a greater virtue in women than in men? Banus, because a want of chastity in women is attended with inconveniences much more serious and dangerous for them and for society. For without taking into account the pains and disease they have in common with men, they are further exposed to all the disadvantages and perils that precede, attend, and follow childbirth. When pregnant, contrary to law, they become an object of public scandal and contempt, and spend the remainder of their lives in bitterness and misery. Moreover, all the expense of maintaining and educating their fatherless children falls on them, which expense impoverishes them, and is in every way prejudicial to their physical and moral existence. In this situation, deprived of the freshness and health that constitutes their charm, carrying with them an extraneous and expensive burden, they are less prized by men, they find no solid establishment, they fall into poverty, misery, and wretchedness, and thus drag on in the sorrow their unhappy existence. Josephus, does the natural and cosmic law extend so far as the scruples of desires and thoughts? Banus, yes, because in the physical laws of the human body, thoughts and desires inflame the senses, and soon provoke to action. Now, by another law of nature in the organization of our body, those actions become mechanical wants which recur at certain periods of days or weeks, so that, at such time, the want is renewed of such an action and such a secretion. If this action and this secretion be injurious to health, the habitude of them becomes destructive of life itself. Thus thoughts and desires have a true and natural importance. Josephus, should modesty be considered as a natural virtue? Banus, yes, because modesty, inasmuch as it is a shame of certain actions, maintains the soul and body in all those habits useful to good order and to self-preservation. Chapter 6. The natural foundation of courage and activity. Josephus, are courage and strength of body and mind virtues according to the natural and cosmic law? Banus, yes, and most important virtues, for they are efficacious and indispensable means of attempting to our preservation and welfare. The courageous and strong man repulses oppression, defends his life, his liberty, and his property. By his labor he procures himself an abundant subsistence, which he enjoys in tranquility and peace of mind. If he falls into misfortune, from which his prudence could not protect him, he supports them with fortitude and resignation, and it is for these reasons that the ancient moralists have reckoned strength and courage among the four principal virtues. Josephus, should weakness and cowardice be considered as vices according to natural and cosmic law? Banus, yes, since it is certain that they produce innumerable calamities. The weak or cowardly man lives in perpetual cares and agonies. He undermines his health by the dread, oftentimes ill-founded, of attacks and dangers. And this dread, which is an evil, is not a remedy. It renders him, on the contrary, the slave of him who wishes to oppress him. And by the servitude and debasement of all his faculties, it degrades and diminishes his means of existence, so far as the being of his life depends on the will and caprice of another man. Josephus, but after what you have said on the influence of ailments, are not courage and force, as well as many other virtues, in a great measure, the effect of our physical constitution and temperament? Banus, yes, it is true, in so far that these qualities are transmitted by generation and blood, which the elements of which they depend. The most reiterated and constant facts prove that in the breed of animals of every kind, we see certain physical and moral qualities attached to the individuals of those species, increase or decay according to the combination and mixtures that they make with other breeds. Josephus. But then, as our will is not sufficient to procure us these qualities, is it a crime to be destitute of them? Banish. No, it is not a crime, but a misfortune. It is what the ancients call an unlucky fatality. But even then, we have it yet in our power to acquire them. For as soon as we know on what physical elements such or such a quality is founded, we can promote its growth and hasten its development by a skillful management of these elements. And in this consists the science of education, which, according as it is directed, meliorates or degrades individuals or the whole race to such a pitch as totally to change their nature and inclination, for which reason it is of the greatest importance to be acquainted with the natural and cosmic laws by which these operations and changes are certainly and necessarily effected. Josephus. Why do you say that activity is a virtue according to the natural and cosmic laws? Banish. Because the man who works and employs his time usefully derives from it 1,000 precious advantages to his existence. If he is born poor, his labor furnishes him with subsistence, and still more so if he is sober, continent, and prudent, for he soon acquires a competency, and enjoys the sweets of life. His very labor gives him virtues. For when he occupies his body and mind, he is not affected with unruly desires. Time does not lie heavy on him. He contracts mild habits. He augments his strength and health, and attains a peaceful and happy old age. Josephus. Are idleness and sloth vices according to natural and cosmic law? Banish. Yes, and the most pernicious of all vices, for they lead to all the other. By idleness and sloth man remains ignorant. He forgets even the science he had acquired, and falls into all the misfortune which accompany ignorance and folly. By idleness and sloth man, devoured with disquietude in order to dissipate it, abandons himself to all the desires of his senses, which, becoming every day more inordinate, render him intemperate, gluttonous, lascivious, enervated, cowardly, vile, and contemptible. But the certain effect of all these vices, he ruins his fortune, consumes his health, and terminates his life in all the agonies of sickness and of poverty. Josephus. From what you say, one would think that poverty was a vice. Banish. No, it is not a vice, but it is still less a virtue, for it is by far more ready to injure than to be useful. It is even commonly the result or the beginning of vice, for the effect of all individual vices is to lead to ignorance and the privation of the necessities of life. And when a man is want of necessaries, he is tempted to procure them by vicious means, that is to say, by means injurious to society. All the individual virtues tend, on the contrary, to procure the man an abundant subsistence, and when he has more than he can consume, it is much easier for him to give to others and to practice the actions useful to society. Josephus. Do you look upon opulence as a vice? Banish. No, but still less as a vice. It is the use alone of wealth that can be called virtuous or vicious, according to its serviceable or prejudicial to man or society. Wealth is an instrument, the use and employment alone of which determines its virtue or vice. The natural foundation of cleanliness. Josephus. Why is cleanliness included among the natural virtues? Because it is, in reality, one of the most important among them, on account of its powerful influence over the health and preservation of the body. Cleanliness, as well in dress and residence as in food, obviates the pernicious effects of the humidity, baneful odors, and contagious exhalations proceeding from all things abandoned but putrefaction. Cleanliness maintains free transpiration. It renews the air, refreshes the blood, and disposes even to the mind the cheerfulness. From this it appears that persons attentive to the cleanliness of their bodies and habitation are in general more healthy and less subject to disease than those who live in filth and nastiness. And it is further remarked that cleanliness carries with it, throughout all the branches of domestic administration, habits of order and arrangement, which are the chief means and first elements of happiness. Josephus. Uncleanliness or filthiness is then a real vice according to the natural and cosmic law. Banish. Yes, as real as one is drunkenness, or as idleness, from which is the great measure it is derived. Uncleanliness is the second, and often the first, cause of many inconveniences, and even of grievous disorders. It is a fact in medicine that it brings on the itch, the scruff, leprosies, as much of the use of the tainted or sour elements, that it favors the contagious influence of the plague and malignant fevers, that it occasions rheumatism, by encrusting the skin with dirt and thereby preventing transpiration, without reckoning the shameful inconvenience of being devoured by vermin, the foul appendage of misery and depravity. Most ancient legislators therefore considered cleanliness, which they call purity, as one of the essential dogmas of their religion. It was for this reason that they expelled from society and even punished corporally those who were infected with distempers produced by uncleanliness, that they instituted and consecrated ceremonies of ablutions, baptism, and purification, even by the aromatic fumes of incense, myrrh, etc., so that the entire system of all these rites of clean and unclean things degenerated since into abuse and prejudice, were only founded originally on the judicious observation which wise and learned men had made, of the extreme influence that cleanliness in food, dress, and abode exercise over the health of the body, and by the immediate consequence over that of the mind and moral faculties. Thus all the individual virtues have for their object, more or less direct, more or less near, the preservation of the man who practices them, and by the preservation of each man they lead to that of families and society, which are composed of the united sum of individuals. Chapter 7. The Natural Foundation of Domestic Virtues. Josephus. What do you mean by domestic virtues? Banus. I mean the practice of actions useful to a family supposed to live in the same house. Josephus. What are those virtues according to the natural and cosmic law? Banus. They are economy, paternal love, filial love, conjugal love, fraternal love, and the accomplishment of the duties of master and servant. Josephus. What is economy? Banus. It is the proper administration of everything that concerns the existence of a family or house, and as a subsistence holds the first rank. The word economy is confined to the best employment of values for the wants of life. Josephus. Why is economy a virtue? Banus. Because a man who makes no useless expenses acquires an abundancy, which is true wealth, and by means of which he acquires for himself and his family everything that is really convenient and useful, without mentioning his securing thereby resources against accidental and unforeseen losses, so that he and his family enjoy an agreeable and undisturbed competency, which is the basis of human felicity in society. Josephus. Dissipation and then prodigality, therefore, are vices? Banus. Yes, for by them man in the end is deprived of the necessities of life and society. He falls into poverty and wretchedness. Josephus. What is paternal love? Banus. It is the assiduous care taken by parents to make their children contract the habit of every action useful to themselves and to society. Josephus. Why is paternal tenderness a virtue in parents? Banus. Because parents who rear their children in these habits procure for themselves, during the course of their lives, enjoyments and help that give a sensible satisfaction of every instant, and which assure to them, when advanced in years, supports and consolation against the wants and calamities of all kinds with which old age is beset. Josephus. Is paternal love a common virtue? Banus. No, notwithstanding the ostentation made by its parents, it is a rare virtue. They do not love their children, they caress and spoil them. In them they love only the agents of their will, the instruments of their power, the trophies of their vanity, the pastime of their idleness. It is not so much the welfare of the children that they propose to themselves, as their submission and obedience. And if among children so many are seen ungrateful for benefits received, it is because they are among parents as many despotic and ignorant benefactors. Josephus. Why do you say that conjugal love is a virtue? Banus. Because the concord and union resulting from the love of the married established in the heart of the family a multitude of habits useful to its prosperity and preservation. The united pair are attached to and seldom quit their home. They superintend each particular direction to it. They attend to the education of their children. They prevent all disorder and dissipation, and from the whole of their good conduct they live in ease and consideration. While married persons who do not love one another fill their house with quarrels and troubles, the married pair avoid each other or contend in lawsuits, and the whole family falls in disorder, ruin, disgrace, and want. Josephus. Is adultery an offense according to the Mosaic law? Banus. Yes, for it is attended with a number of habits injurious to the married and to the families. The wife or husband, whose affections are restrained, neglect their house, avoid it, and deprave it, and much they can, of its revenues or income, to expend them with the object of their affection. Hence arise quarrels, scandal, lawsuits, the neglect of the children and servants, and at last the plundering and ruin of the whole family. Josephus. What is filial love? Banus. It is on the side of the children, the practice of those actions useful to themselves and their parents. Josephus, how does the natural and cosmic law prescribe filial love? Banus, by three principal motives. 1. By sentiment, for the affectionate care of parents inspires from the most tender age mild habits or attachments. 2. By justice, for children owe to their parents a return and indemnity for the cares and even for the expenses they have caused them. 3. By personal interest, for if they use them ill, they give to their own children examples of revolt and ingratitude, which authorize them at the future day to behave to themselves in a similar manner. Josephus, are we to understand by filial love a passive and blind submission? Banus, no, but a reasonable submission, founded on the knowledge of the mutual rights and duties of parents and children, rights and duties without the observance of which their mutual conduct is nothing but disorder. Josephus, what is fraternal love? Why is fraternal love a virtue? Banus, because the concord and union, which result from the love of brothers, establish the strength, security, and conservation of the family. Brothers united defend themselves against all oppression. They aid one another in their wants. They help one another in their misfortune, and thus secure their common existence, while brothers disunited abandon each to his own personal strength, fall into all the inconvenience attendant on an isolated state and individual weakness. This is what a certain Scythian king ingeniously expressed when, on his deathbed, calling his children to them, he ordered them to break a bundle of arrows. The young, though strong, being unable to effect it, he took them in his turn. Untying them, broke each of the arrows separately with his fingers. Behold, he said, the effects of union. United together you will be invincible. Taken separately you will be broken like reeds. Josephus, what are the reciprocal duties of master and of servant? Banus, they consist in the practice of the action which are respectively and justly useful to them. And here begin the relations of society. For the rule and measure of these respective actions is the equilibrium, or equality between the service and the recompense, between what one returns and the other gives, which is the fundamental basis of all society. Thus all the domestic and individual virtues refer more or less immediately, but always with certitude, to the physical object of the amelioration and preservation of man, and are thereby precepts resulting from the fundamental law of nature in its formation. The natural foundation of the social virtues, justice. Josephus, what is society? Banus, it is every reunion of men living together under the clause of an expressed or tacit contract, which has for its end their common preservation. Josephus, are the social virtues numerous? Banus, yes, they are all in great number, as the kinds of actions useful to society, but all may be reduced to one principle. Josephus, what is that fundamental principle according to the natural and cosmic law? Banus, it is justice, which alone comprises all the virtues of society. Why do you say that justice is the fundamental and almost only virtue of society? Banus, because it alone embraces the practice of all the actions useful to it, and because of all the other virtues under the denominations of charity, humanity, probity, love of one's country, sincerity, generosity, simplicity of manner, and modesty are only varied forms and diversified applications of the axiom, do not do to another what you do not wish to be done to yourself, which is the definition of justice. Josephus, how does the natural and cosmic law prescribe justice? Banus, by three physical attributes inherent in the organization of man. Josephus, what are these attributes? Banus, they are equality, liberty, and property. Josephus, how is equality a physical property of man? Banus, because all men, having equally eyes, hands, mouth, ears, and the necessity of making use of them in order to live, have, by this reason alone, an equal right to life, and to the use of the ailments which maintain it, they are all equal before the Creator. Josephus, do you suppose that all men hear equally, see equally, feel equally, have equal wants and equal passions? Banus, no, for it is evident and daily demonstrated that one is short, another long-sighted, that one eats much, another little, that one has mild, another violent passion, in a word, that one is weak in body and mind, while another is strong in both. Josephus, they are therefore really unequal? Banus, yes, in the development of their means, but not in the nature and essence of those means. They are made of the same stuff, but not in the same dimension, nor are the weight and value equal. Our language possesses no one word capable of expressing the identity of nature and the diversity of its form and employment. It is a proportional equality, and it is for this reason I have said, equal before the Creator, and in the order of nature. Consequently, all men have equal right to all preconditions and possibilities of life and individual evolution. Josephus, how is liberty a physical attribute of man? Banus, because all men have senses sufficient for their preservation, no one wanting the eye of another to see, his ear to hear, his mouth to eat, his feet to walk. They are all, by this very reason, constituted naturally independent and free. No man is necessarily subjected to another, nor has he a right to dominate over him. Josephus, but if a man is born strong, has he a natural right to master the weak man? Banus, no, for it is neither a necessity for him, nor a convention between them. It is an abusive extension of his strength, and here an abuse is made of the word right, which in its true meaning implies justice or reciprocal faculty. Josephus, how is property a physical attribute of man? Banus, inasmuch as all men, being constituted equal or similar to one another, and consequently independent and free, each is the absolute master, the full proprietor of his body, and of the produce of his labor. Josephus, how is justice derived from these three attributes? Banus, in this, that men being equal and free, owing nothing to each other, have no right to require anything from one another, only inasmuch as the balance of what is given is in equilibrium with what is returned. And it is this equality, this equilibrium, which is called justice, equity, and that is to say the equality and justice are but one of the same word, the same natural and cosmic laws of which the social virtues are only applications and derivatives. Chapter 8. The natural development of the social virtues. Josephus, explain how the social virtues are derived from the natural and cosmic law. How is charity or the love of one's neighbor a precept and application of it? Banus, by reason of equality and reciprocity. For when we injure another, we give him a right to injure us in return. Thus, by attacking the existence of our neighbor, we endanger our own. From the effect of reciprocity, on the other hand, by doing good to others, we have room and right to expect an equivalent exchange. And such is the character of all social virtues, that they are useful of the man who practices them, by the right of reciprocity which they give him over those who are benefited by them. Josephus, charity is then nothing but justice. Banus, yes, it is only justice, with this slight difference, that strict justice confines itself to saying, do not do to another the harm you would not wish he should do to you, and that charity, or the love of one's neighbor, extends so far as to say, do to another the good with which you would wish to receive from him. Josephus, does it enjoin forgiveness of injuries? Banus, yes, when that forgiveness implies self-preservation. Josephus, does the law of nature prescribe to do good to others beyond the bounds of reason and measure? Banus, no, for it is sure way of leading them to ingratitude. Such is the force of sentiment and justice implanted in the heart of man, that he is not even grateful for benefits conferred without discretion. There is only one measure with them, and that is to be just. Josephus, is almsgiving a virtuous action in society? Banus, yes, when it is practiced according to the rule first mentioned, without which it degenerates into imprudence and vice, inasmuch as it encourages laziness, which is hurtful to the beggar and to society. No one has a right to partake of the property and fruits of another's labor without rendering an equivalent of his own industry. Josephus, does the natural and cosmic law prescribe probity? Banus, yes, for probity is nothing more than respect for one's own right in those of another, a respect founded on a prudent and well-combined calculation of our interest compared to those of others. Josephus, but does not this calculation, which embraces the complicated interest and rights of the social state, require an enlightened understanding and knowledge, which makes it a difficult science? Banus, yes, and a science so much the more delicate as the honest man pronounces it in his own cause. Josephus, probity, then, shows an extension in justice in the mind. Banus, yes, for the honest man almost always neglects a present interest, in order not to destroy a future one, whereas the knave does the contrary, and loses a great future interest for a present smaller one. Josephus, improbity, then, is a sign of false judgment and a narrow mind. Banus, yes, and rogues may be defined ignorant and silly calculators, for they do not understand their true interest, and they pretend to cunning. Nevertheless, their cunning only ends in making known what they are, in losing all confidence and esteem, and the good service resulting from them for their physical and social existence. They neither live in peace with others nor with themselves, and incessantly menaced by their conscience and their enemies, they enjoy no other real happiness but that of not being punished. Josephus, does the natural and cosmic law forbid robbery? Banus, yes, for the man who robs another gives him a right to rob him. From that moment there is no security in his property, nor in his means of preservation. Thus, in injuring others, he by a counterblow injures himself. Josephus, does it interdict even an inclination to rob? Banus, yes, for the inclination leads naturally to action, and it is for this reason that envy is considered a sin. Josephus, how does it forbid murder? Banus, by the most powerful motives of self-preservation. For first, the man who attacks exposes himself to the risk of being killed. By the right of defense, equally, if he kills, he gives to the relations and friends of the deceased, and to the society at large, an equal right of killing him, so that his life is no longer in safety. Josephus, how can we, by the natural and cosmic law, repair the evil we have done? Banus, by rendering a proportionate good to those whom we have injured. Josephus, does it allow us to repair it by prayers, vows, offering to God, fasting, and mortification? Banus, no, for all those things are foreign to the action we wish to repair. They neither restore the ox to him from whom it was been stolen, honor to him whom we have deprived of it, nor life to him from whom it had been taken away. Consequently, they miss the end of justice. They only preserve contracts by which a man sells to another goods which do not belong to him. They are a real deprivation of morality, inasmuch as they embolden to commit crimes through the hope of expiating them. Wherefore they have been the real cause of all the evils by which the people among whom these expiatory practices were used, having been continually tormented. Josephus, does the natural and cosmic law order sincerity? Banus, yes, for lying, perfidy, and perjury create distrust, quarrels, hatred, revenge, and a crowd of evils among them, which tend to their common destruction, while sincerity and fidelity establish confidence, concord, and peace, besides the infinite good resulting from such a state of things to society. Josephus, does it prescribe mildness and modesty? Banus, yes, for harshness and obduracy, by alienating from us the hearts of other men. Give them an inclination to hurt us. Ostentation and vanity, by wounding their self-love and jealousy, occasion us to miss the end of a real utility. Josephus, does it prescribe humility as a virtue? No, for it is a propensity in the human heart to despise secretly everything that presents to it the idea of weakness, and self-debasement encourages pride and oppression in others. The balance must be kept in equipoise. Josephus, you have reckoned simplicity of manners among the social virtues. What do you understand by that word? Banus, I mean the restricting of our wants and desires to what is truly useful to the existence of the individual and his family. That is to say, the man of simple manners has but a few wants, and lives content with a little. Josephus, how is this virtue prescribed to us? Banus, by the numerous advantages which the practice of it procures to the individual and to society. For the man, whose wants are few, is free at once from a crowd of cares, perplexity, and labor. He avoids many quarrels and contests arise from avidity and a desire of gain. He spares himself the anxiety of ambition, the inquietude of possession, and the uneasiness of losses, finding superfluity, wherefore he is the real rich man, always content with what he has. He is happy at little expense, and the other men, not fearing any competition from him, leave him in quiet, and are disposed to render him the service he should stand in need of. And if this virtue of simplicity extends to a whole people, they ensure to themselves abundance, rich in everything they do not consume. They acquire immense means of exchange and commerce. They work, fabricate, and sell at a lower price than others, and attain to all kinds of prosperity, both at home and abroad. Josephus, what is the vice contrary to this virtue? Banus, it is cupidity and luxury. Josephus, is luxury a vice in the individual and in society? Banus, yes, and to that degree that it may be said to include all the others. For the man who stands in need of many things imposes thereby on himself all the anxiety, and submits to all the means, just or unjust, of acquiring them. Does he possess an enjoyment, he covets another, and in the bosom of superfluity he is never rich. A commodious dwelling is not sufficient for him. He must have a beautiful palace, not content with plenteous table. He must have rare, costly viands. He must have splendid furniture, expensive clothes, a train of attendants, horses, carriages, women, theatrical representation, and games. Now, to supply so many expenses, much money must be had, and he looks on every method of procuring it as good and even necessary. At first he borrows, afterward he steals, robs, plunders, is at war with every one, ruins, and is ruined. Should a nation be involved in luxury, it occasions on a larger scale the same devastation. By reason that it consumes its entire produce, it finds itself poor even with abundance. It has nothing to sell to foreigners. Its manufactures are carried on at great expense, and are sold too dear. It becomes tributary for everything it imports. It attacks externally its consideration, power, strength, and means of defense and preservation, while internally it undermines and falls into the dissolution of its members. All its citizens, being covetous of enjoyment, are engaged in a perpetual struggle to obtain them. All injure or are near injuring themselves, and hence arise these habits and actions of usurpation, which constitute what is denominated moral corruption, internal war between citizen and citizen. From luxury arises avidity, from avidity invasion by violence and perfidy. From luxury arises the inequity of the judge, the venality of the witness, the improbity of the husband, the prostitution of the wife, the obduracy of parents, the ingratitude of children, the avarice of the master, the dishonesty of the servant, the dilapidation of the administration, the perversity of the legislator, lying, perfidy, perjury, assassination, and all the disorder of the social state. So that it was with a profound sense of truth that ancient legislators and philosophers have laid the basis of the social virtues on simplicity of manners, restriction of wants, and a contentment with a little, and a sure way of knowing the extent of a man's virtue and vice is to find out if his expenses are proportionate to his fortune, and calculate from his want of money, his probity, his integrity in fulfilling his engagement, his devotion to the public weal, and a sincere or pretended love of his country and of humanity. Josephus, what do you mean by the word country? Banus, I mean the community of citizens who, united by fraternal sentiments and reciprocal wants, make of their respective strength one common force, the reaction of which on each of them assumes the noble and beneficent character of fraternity. In society, citizens form a unity of interest. In our country, we form a family of endearing attachments. It is charity, the love of one's neighbor extended to the whole nation. Now, as charity cannot be separated from justice, no member of the family can pretend to the enjoyment of its advantage except in proportion to his labor. If he consumes more than he produces, he necessarily encroaches on his fellow citizen, and it is only by consuming less that what he produces or possesses that he can acquire the means of making sacrifice and being generous. Josephus, what do you conclude from all of this? Banus, I conclude from it, and all the social virtues are only the habitude of actions, and useful to society and to the individual who practices them, that they refer to the physical object of man's preservation, that nature, having implanted in us the want of that preservation, has made a law to us of all its consequence, and a crime of everything that deviates from it, that we carry in us the seed of every virtue and every perfection, that it only requires to be developed, that we are only happy inasmuch as we observe the rules established by nature for the end of our preservation, and that all wisdom, all perfection, all law, all virtue, all philosophy consist in the practice and the axioms founded on the natural and cosmic laws. Josephus, what are these axioms? Banus, your father is the cosmos, your mother is nature, your brothers are your fellow men. Live in harmony with the laws and forces of the universe, nature, and of your own being. Preserve them. Learn the natural and cosmic laws. Live in peace with yourself, with humanity, with nature and the universe. Live in creative love with and for your fellow men, that they may live for thee. Peace be with you. End of book.